Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Director Reinecke.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Zimmer.
Here.
Chair O'Hilsky.
Present.
All right, all four members present.
Okay, can we have pledge of allegiance, please? We'll have Margaret lead us in that.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any board member comments? You may make a brief comment, provide project status updates, or communicate with each other, director, staff, or the public regarding non-agenda topics, but must be within our purview.
No comment.
That's a no. I'm trying to get you to be more vocal. Okay, so I don't have any either. So we'll move on to number 5, which is special presentation, which we have none of. And then we'll move to number 6, the consent agenda, which there's 2 items on the consent agenda. One is 6A, the 2022 budget update and the invoice register. And 6B, the approval of minutes from the September 21, 2022 BMC meeting. So do we have any questions or comments before we go to public comment?
I just have a revision request on what is it, 9? I'm sorry, it's the one where I voted. I'm sorry, I lost my spot here. I'm
That always
trying to
happens.
work through here.
Not for you, but for everybody.
Yeah. So our let me go back here. So there's a when we talked about the vote regarding the wells LA 13 modification, we broke those out into 3 different projects: the well, the agricultural turf estimates, and then the well basin or well database. So just to clarify, the minutes state that it comes across as that I voted no on all of that, but really we broke it down into 3. So the process on the 3 was the Farrell well we unanimously approved. Update to agriculture and turf, we unanimously voted no. And then on the basin well database, I was the only one that voted no on that one. Hope we can make that correction.
Yeah, I can look at that correction. My recollection is we really only had one motion at the end, but I can add some additional narrative to make it clear that, that there was an indication of support for the other 2 items by all the directors, and then the one item by only 2 of the 4 directors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the way the motion was. It's my recollection that it had unanimous for the first 2 and then split for the last one. But I think we did it as a single vote.
Yeah, but I can, to address Director Zimmer's request,
Right.
We can add some additional narrative to make it a little more clear under maybe the director or the board direction or the board dialogue, how each of the directors, voiced their opinions on each of the individual proposed budget items.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment on the consent agenda.
If you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. There's no public comment online.
Okay, great. So we'll close public comment and I will take a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Motion to approve by Supervisor Gibson.
Well,
You're I'm sorry. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. So can we just have a roll call vote, Daniel, please?
Director Reinecke,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Hilsky.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 7, which is public comment for items not appearing on the agenda. So we can have any public comment, if anybody has any for items not on the agenda, but again, remember, it must be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Basin Management Committee.
If you'd like to make public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand.
I need to wait for Ron to help me with some slides.
Oh. I will do the online public comment first then.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards. And for items not on the agenda, I wanted to touch on several items. First of all, we continue to hear an oft repeated idea that 50% of the water demand in the basin is from unmetered wells. And it goes on to claim that how can we manage our groundwater basin without flow meters on all wells? Well, and I'm going to speak for some context, and I'm going to give you some round numbers. They may be off a little bit, but we have approximately 300 plus wells overlying our basin. Some of them aren't used, by the way, and I've mentioned that in the past. The agricultural wells, which represent about 750 acre feet, call it, or 75% of that unmetered constituency, there are about 30 to 35 ag wells overlying our basin that use that amount of water. Likewise, we have maybe 100 to 150 active rural wells that represent about 10% of the demand. And by the way, those are mostly drawn from the zone C. So my point is that with regard to the unmetered wells, it's going to be nearly impossible to get ag wells metered. And really, there are so few rural wells that I think it's going to be, well, the Title 19 review may be speaking to that. So we'll look for that. But I think that the notion that everything's unmetered and we can't manage the basin is misplaced. Additionally, I'd like to allude a little bit to the water board meeting. And the water board meeting last Friday, the takeaway that I have is that the water board is pretty unfamiliar with the subject material as reflected in their comments. And as an example, they wanted to send out a newsletter. They thought a newsletter going out to all the households or businesses and households in Los Osos was a great idea. So they're kind of out of touch, and I'm not sure what we can do about it, if it matters at all. But I wanted to mention that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
There's no further public comment online.
Okay, thank you. Public comment in the boardroom.
Since there's only 2 of us commenting today, could I possibly get an extra minute if I run over?
You have 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll try and talk fast. Oh, so we already started. Okay.
We'll go ahead and restart.
Okay. Thank you. Is it? Where is it?
You'll see.
No, I mean, where's the first slide?
Oh.
Public comment on things that are not on the agenda? Do you think it fits better elsewhere? Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Laura, are you there?
Hello, Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Can you pull up Becky's presentation?
I have been trying to download it and it keeps telling me there's an unexpected error.
Okay, and what about off the thumb drive? I did the same thing.
I don't know, I downloaded it onto the server, so it's gonna say the same thing.
Did you put it on the server?
Oh, yes, I sent you a message. It's on the server.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going there right now. Is it in the BMC folder?
Yep.
I'm not seeing it on the BMC folder. I'm so sorry. What is it titled?
Becky's folder, I think.
That or safe water or state water for Los Osos.
And Ron, you said you put it in the Basin Management Committee folder?
Round's back, so
Yeah, release the thumb drive.
Daniel's gonna try something here.
I'm so sorry.
No, we're having technical errors.
I used to do a lot of slideshows at schools, and it was nice to have an old projector that you could just show on the wall.
Exactly.
Just bring extra bulbs.
Just bring some paper and an easel.
I could draw it.
Instead of a whiteboard, you could just write on the back of that white shade there.
Yeah. You know, I actually did use shades, not for writing, but in classrooms that had no money, they had window shades. Hey, there it
we
is.
go.
Okay. And I'll try to coordinate the next and everything better than I have before. My first thing I wanted to comment on was I did attend the water board meeting, lots of good comments and information. Two takeaways for me in the past week is, and this is from the staff report from James Bishop to the water board. To date, none of the basin sustainability metrics have been achieved. However, trending towards sustainability. The nitrate concentration is anticipated to achieve the target by 2050. So let's look at that. And the same for water level and chloride. Let's look at it for a minute. That's 28 years from now. That's a long time. Let's go to the next one. And just a graphic looking, oh, you can't see the bottom. It says 2022 and way in the distance is 2050. Let's go to the next one.
I'm going to give you a little more than 3 minutes because we're having technical problems that are delaying.
you.
things, so I didn't realize that.
Right. And the mask makes it hard to breathe, so I run out of breath. So currently I'm 64 years old. Oh, come back.
Well,
And in 2050, I'm going to be 92. And I wonder what my reaction will be when we finally make it to sustainability. Will it be, woohoo, we made it? And I will be excited. Or this woman at the top, I'm too tired for the BMC after party. Or the lady in the bottom, just yay. Let's go to the next one. I like to put some humor in there. Let's go to the next one. I'm already tired. I'm sure you guys are too. Go back up. Okay, this was from the water board meeting, and this was comments by Monica Hunter of Los Osos. And yes, they did make some mistakes in what they said. Monica was talking about Colorado River water for state water for us, but she did say that's not a cheap solution, which we know, and neither is cleaning nitrates out of the aquifer. The board chair said chasing state water is not maybe a great idea, but she said that's, in comparison to other things. Next slide. And this is for people at home, I hope, that maybe don't know about our state water project, but up there at the top of the slide is Lake Almanor. And it's up in the Feather River Basin, where 61% of the water that goes into the state water project comes from. Next slide. So again, it says 61%, and San Luis Obispo has 0.06 share of that water. Next one. The Feather River watershed is prone to wildfires. And why is this important? Because wildfires have an effect on watersheds. Next one. One thing and this shows you an acreage. 153,000 acres were burned just in the Paradise Fire. Go to the next one. Our water cycle is even affected by wildfire. More water evaporates into the air because the shade cover is gone from all of the trees. Next one. This is our snowpack from, you can see March 2022, and then May, and then July. And there is basically no snowpack in the Sierras. Next one. And this just shows you the water going down the state. Next one. You can see the coastal branch in the lower one there. Next one. This is the San Luis Reservoir that we're hoping to get some water from in rainy years. That brown line going through those yellow letters where it says used to be full of water is where the water line was. Next one. And so this is the picture of the intertie that we're hoping to build. Let's go to the next one. I'm saying wishful thinking is not going to save our aquifer, and I want to save it, and I wish there was state water we could get. And Ron Munz has explained to me too that just getting rid of nitrates is expensive, but also the brine has to be sent somewhere. Next one. We need more conservation. I mean, we see it around town and there are things that can be done. Next one. And I'm hoping to get people together to talk about that. Another neighbor and I are talking about trying to help go after grants to help gutter every house in this town. So I'm not a big fan of state water, but I am a fan of water conservation and making our aquifer better so people can build on their vacant lots. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops, thank you. Okay, we have no other public comment in the boardroom here, so we'll close public comment on items not appearing on the agenda and move to item 8, which is the executive director's report.
Thank you, Chair Hilsky. Executive Director's report. I'll try to move through this relatively quickly. We met probably less than a full month ago. Just again, hitting underlined items. One, just reporting that as the Executive Director, I did provide a presentation to the Regional Water Quality Control Board last Friday, the 14th of October. I'm sure a recording of that is available if anybody's interested to see the presentation and the dialogue that followed. A number of the items in the Executive Director's report we're going to cover as agenda items later in the meeting. So one's the grant application for the water recycling funding program. We'll talk about that later. Sustainable yield estimate is a dedicated item. Lower aquifer monitoring. At the last meeting, the BMC approved modifying LA 13 to improve its ability to monitor zone E. So that is progressing. Funding and organizationals on the agenda. Notification that we selected legal counsel for the BMC was done at the last meeting. We have updated water flow information and then updates on the programs A and program C wells. So those are the items in the Executive Director's report. And rather than go through all of them, just turn it over to the BMC for questions.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Are there any questions before we go to public comment?
Just following up on your presentation to the regional board, did you have any dialogue with them or any kind of comments back? Anything that's not on the recording? I guess I wasn't there in person, so I was just seeing if there's any additional insight or information that would be good for the board to know.
Yeah, I would say no additional dialogue that wasn't on the recording. Fortunately, had to leave even before the item was over to go coach soccer practice. So I didn't get to stick around and have any follow-up conversations. But, there was a number of questions that the board had. after the presentation. That's all should be on the record. I guess just the one takeaway from me, and I think that the regional board struggled with, and I think the community of Los Osos struggles with, is we are split up under so many different jurisdictions with authority over different portions of our community and different types of authority, that it makes it a challenge, A, in just understanding all of it, and then B, operating within those different jurisdictions.
Yeah, that's a good comment. And then what about the Los Osos well database development? Have we started that work, or I didn't see an update on that one?
Yeah, good point. So that work I've authorized Cleith Harris to begin that work. They have done some of the initial steps and have indicated to me that work will be done before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can you please speak into the microphone?
Oh, okay. Is that better? Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for letting me know. So going back, you mentioned the community-wide nitrate removal facility, and maybe I'm just too new to the group to know what discussions have went on for that. I'm curious what that status is right now for Los Osos.
Yes, so the community-wide nitrate facility is a program outlined in the basin plan. It's program B. It's envisioned as a program to increase the sustainable yield through increased upper aquifer pumping and nitrate treatment of that water for future growth. Is how it's been characterized, in the basin plan and by the BMC. It's outlined in our basin plan programs for potential future implementation. However, there is, to my knowledge, really no specific initiative, advancing that forward. We don't have a funding program. We don't have a BMC purveyor, leading the implementation of that. And so while it is in the basin plan, it isn't in at least the BMC's, and to my knowledge, the purveyor's near-term work plan.
Right.
Okay, that is really helpful. So kind of going into that, I'm wondering if anyone here has ever considered biotreatment for nitrate, given the much more sustainable and water use friendly nature of using biofiltration for nitrate. Have we considered that as a central facility?
I don't know that the BMC has done any extensive analysis of that opportunity. I have heard, through the industry that there are advancements in nitrate treatment technology. To be honest, I'm not familiar with specifically those biotreatment processes, though. I do know that in wastewater, we use biological treatment for nitrates all the time. So if anybody has information, or if the BMC would like additional information, that could be brought back at a future meeting.
Okay. Well, I happen to be in contact with one of the companies that's premier in California, and they have permitted facilities, which I think is the key here, because you want something you can permit under DDW, right? Mm-hmm. So if the BMC is interested, I think a presentation from them would be really interesting for the group to see a more sustainable type nitrate system for Los Osos that doesn't create brine.
We have had presentations on other nitrate treatment systems in the past, so I would be supportive.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Thank you. And my other question, so program Seawell, I know Golden State and the CSD, you guys are over on this side of the basin, and I'm curious if S&T has an opportunity to be a part of that at all, and what that would take.
I don't, Ron, unless you have a question, we'll just have to defer that for next meeting.
To me, I mean, we can, coming from the neutral position of Switzerland as the county, my understanding is there's no specific participation by S&T at this point. But, I think all of that's on the table. This is one basin. We're talking about one water and any kind of agreements that S&T would like to make with fellow members of the BMC that are mutually acceptable, I think are well within the scope of what we're trying to do. So I think at any and all times, that kind of sharing of resources and cooperative programs are absolutely on the table. But at this point, we don't have a structure.
Correct.
And part of that is going to be talked about as we talk about a different structure for the BMC, which might be as a JPA, which I think obviously makes a lot of sense and comes with a certain amount of overhead. So.
Right. Mhm. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
We
All right.
understand that, and thank you for the follow-up on that.
Okay, thank you. So with that, then we'll go to public comment on the executive director's report.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. There's no public comment online.
We have one member in the boardroom that would like to speak.
Are we ready? Becky McFarland again. Again, I was at the meeting and it was good to hear more information and I did learn things. I did think that the board members had some really good questions and some comments. The part about them wanting to get information out to the community, I agree with. I don't see how it could happen once a month, but somehow, whether it's getting a community foundation grant or something to be able to do that, to get this information out to people in a very user-friendly, easy to follow, easy to read form is important. One of their comments was people shouldn't have to go to the BMC report to figure this out. I mean, the summary is good and I can understand most of it, but it still needs to be pared down into a community friendly type thing. And I have volunteered before. I'd be happy to help on something like that. But the other big takeaway is that the same line is we haven't met any of the metrics yet for sustainability, none, and it'll be 48 years. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no other public comment in the boardroom, so with that, then we'll close public comment on the executive director's report. We don't need a motion on this. It was just informational, correct? Okay, then we'll move on to the action items. We have 4 action items. First action item is 9A, the calendar year 2023 sustainable yield estimate.
Thank you, Chair Hilsky. Yes, item 9A, calendar year 2023 sustainable yield estimate. Just a brief overview. I know we covered this in extensive detail last year at right around this time, October. But the stipulated judgment requires the Basin Management Committee to establish a sustainable yield estimate for the upcoming year before the end of the prior year. And so this item is being brought to the BMC in order to meet that requirement. The BMC updated the sustainable yield estimate last year and established a sustainable yield of 2,380 acre feet for calendar year 2022. In developing that updated sustainable yield estimate, the BMC made a number of modifications to the criteria that are utilized and the inputs that are included in the model when calculating the sustainable yield estimate. I'll just cover those briefly. The significant changes were, one, with respect to how we define sustainability relative to seawater intrusion. The updated criteria really was changed to not allow seawater to intrude any further under the sustainable yield calculations. In other words, holding the line against seawater intrusion from where it is today or where it had, historically intruded the furthest. Previous sustainable yield estimates allowed for the seawater intrusion to intrude further than current conditions, as long as it stabilized at a certain point that did not overly impact production wells. The other change was with respect to the Broderson Mound. Previous sustainable yield estimates assumed a fully developed Broderson Mound. However, as this committee knows, through our monitoring, the Broderson Mound is building, but it is not fully developed. And current estimates are that it's only about 50% of its anticipated fully developed size. And so the sustainable yield calculations incorporate that assumption or a mound representing its current size, not its fully developed size. The other change was with respect to the precipitation assumption that goes into the model for calculating sustainable yield. We updated the long-term average precipitation to account for the recent 4 or 5 years of additional dry weather that we've experienced since the last update, which led to a lower average precipitation, albeit not that much lower. I think 0.2 inches per year, but did incorporate more recent dry data. And we also updated the assumptions around available infrastructure. One of the things I think I tried to present to the regional board that where you pump matters. That's why we have programs A and program C. And so when we're calculating the sustainable yield for the basin, it's important to account for the infrastructure that the purveyors have available to them when they're pumping water, because both the depth and the location within the basin can impacts the sustainable yield and the threat of seawater intrusion. So those were the things that were changed in the calculation of the calendar year 2022 sustainable yield estimate. The recommendation being brought to the BMC today is to continue with the same sustainable yield estimate for calendar year 2023 of 2,380 acre feet per year for the following reasons. One, no new infrastructure that wasn't already considered in the 2022 sustainable yield estimate has been constructed or anticipated to be online for the majority of 2023, meaning that the program A well completion was already included in the 2022 estimate, and the program C well that the CSD is working on isn't anticipated to come online in 2023. Two, the other reason, the estimates of the development of the Broderson Mound and the long-term rainfall assumptions, are not anticipated to change significantly year over year, and so it don't warrant an updated. And staff believes that they don't warrant rerunning those sustainable yield calculations based on small incremental changes year over year to those assumptions. And then three, we haven't performed any significant hydrogeologic investigations that would warrant an update to the calibration of the model. And so, it's based on the best available information that we have at this time. It seems warranted to stay with the existing sustainable yield. And so that I just did want to try to just show what, if we stay with this existing sustainable yield, what that would mean towards, really the basin yield metric. But, one of the things that I want to try to do is try to simplify this messaging. There were the public comment before about, how this can be confusing. And I think part of that is the basin yield metric and converting this to a number and then our target of a number. So I tried to put this just in terms of yield and pumping and hopefully help everyone better understand what we're talking about here. So as stated previously, the recommended sustainable yield for calendar year 2023 would be 2,380 acre feet per year. And that's a calculation of how much water can be pumped from the basin given the available infrastructure without violating the criteria that I described earlier. The BMC, when establishing the basin plan, said, we don't want to target our pumping at the sustainable yield. We want to have a safety factor. We want to actually target pumping at 80% of the sustainable yield to provide a buffer against uncertainty and a desire to push seawater intrusion back. So when we apply that buffer, that 20% reduction, we get 1,904 acre feet per year, which is the target production for the basin. And then when we look at how much we think we're actually pumping, based on the calendar year 2021 annual report, we are pumping about 2,000 acre feet per year. So, you know, the message as I see that is we're pumping 2,000 acre feet per year. That is below the sustainable yield of the basin, which is beneficial. You know, that is what many basins are really striving for and unfortunately not able to achieve. However, we are still pumping above our target as established in the basin plan, and we're pumping approximately 100 acre feet more than our target. And the way I interpret that is that we still have work to do. You know, we're pumping below the sustainable yield. That's good. But we also aren't at our target yet. So there's work that we need to do. And I really characterize the work in three ways. One, additional conservation to lower our production will help us get to that target. Two, implementation of additional basin plan programs will increase our sustainable yield and help us get to that target. And three, in just letting time pass and letting the Broaderson Mound continue to build will increase our sustainable yield and help us better approach that target. And so that's how I'm trying to characterize that and relay that information to the community. I mean, I have some information on what that translates to in terms of a basin yield metric that in some ways, I think we might be easier if we just look at yield, production, and targets. So with that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. So do we have any questions on item 9A? No. Okay, we'll go to public comment then.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. All right, I'm going to take online comments first. Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you again. My name is Jeff Edwards. And I'd like to provide a little history. Most of you remember, but in 2015, when the Basin Management Plan was approved, we used 2,400 acre feet per year as our safe yield. Fast forward, and we elevated it to 2,760 acre feet through a number of programs and steps. So last year, this committee reduced the 2,760 to 2,380, which you're considering today, again, a change of 380 acre feet per year, which when our purveyor demand is 1,000 acre feet, that's 38% reduction of safe yield. So that's fine. That's where we are today. But I would like to draw your attention to the seawater intrusion threshold in the staff report. And it talks about not allowing seawater to intrude further inland, which I would fully support. I agree stabilization of the incursion is important. But the paragraph goes on to say that there's the goal of reversing seawater intrusion and pushing the seawater intrusion back, the front back toward the bay. Well, that's well beyond stabilizing the front. So I object to that sentence. Reversing seawater intrusion, that's a whole different situation. So I'll conclude by saying that we now have this conservative approach using 2,380 as a safe yield. That's fine, but we will be increasing that, is my understanding, with the completion of Program C. And so we're going up, not down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Is there anybody else on
All right.
line one?
Yes, there's one more. Larry, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Larry Rayo. I think that the sustainable yield is still too high. We do need to reverse seawater intrusion. Seawater intrusion has got to where it is now, and it's been an undesirable condition for many, many years, for 30 years. To let it stay where it is now and just leave it there, that would be a crime, in my opinion. We're for the sustainable yield now, you did lower the rainfall from 17.5 to 17.3 inches per year average rainfall, but the average for the last 15 years has been a couple inches below that. And it seems to me that by continuing to use this higher value, you're appearing to the public to be climate change deniers. It's clear that we can no longer use these long-term values, as it's been shown that climate change will no longer be like it has in the past. We need to go forward and use some more reasonable values. We seem to get these best case scenarios from the BMC, and we never, I'd like to see more best case and worst case scenarios so that we kind of know, where we are. We don't always get the best case scenario as we would like to. So let's just see what the model says if we lowered it to 15, just so we kind of know, and again, the model is just a guesstimate. If you look at what's actually occurring, the metrics are not that good. None of them are showing improvement. So you can't really use the model as how you're going to run things. It's just a way of helping you manage it. The other thing is the committee states that the average indoor use is around 40 gallons per day per person. It's kind of a rosy picture, and that metric isn't helpful. We need to know how much everybody uses totally, indoor and outdoor. The LOCSD does report what their usage is, and it's more at 66 gallons per person per day. At least that's what it was last month. So it should be clear that we need a total water usage and not just an estimated indoor water usage. And that should be easy to calculate. Everybody is metered. You should be able to calculate what the actual per person per day usage is. And I'd also like to see, an accounting for how the usage is determined, because I understand that there are approximately about 10% loss of water. And I'm wondering if that's getting factored in anywhere. So I'd really like to see how the numbers break down.
Okay, thank you. Your time is up. Anybody else?
There's no
online?
further public comment online.
Okay, so we have one member in the boardroom that would like to speak.
Becky McFarland, and thank you for the extra explanation about the chart. I do appreciate that. I think one thing we need to remember is in all of this talk of metrics and everything and how we're conserving is that our aquifer is still critically overdrafted and has been for decades. The seawater intrusion has moved inland about a mile from the edge of the bay since 1985. But our water basin goes out, as you guys know better than I do, out under the sand spit and into the ocean. I was reading the stipulated judgment last night and learning more about that. Also, over the past 17 years, I went through all of the rain data, and we're basing some of our calculations on 17 inches of rain from Morro Bay weather station, and we've been less than 16 inches. Could we invest in our own weather station here so we have our actual Los Osos rain levels? And I know it changes from the fire department to the dump to my house. It's different, but I think that would be really important. I mean, this is our aquifer we're talking about. I think that would be a good way to show the community you're really trying to get the best data. And then we'd all know too. Also, and this is a little off, but Beth did a great presentation at the water board about S&T's water situation. And I think our community should know what's happening in our neighborhood. I don't know how many wells they had before, but they're down to one. And Cabrillo Estates nitrates are coming down from Cabrillo Estates. So we need to care about that little company. And so, yeah, ask Beth to do that again. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public members, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee. The recommendation is to receive the information on the sustainable yield calculations and approve the proposed sustainable yield estimate of 2380 AFY for calendar year 2023.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I think staff analysis is correct. There's no information before us that suggests we should change it. And at appropriate time, I'm prepared to make a motion.
It's appropriate time.
I would move we accept staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, let's take a roll call, Daniel.
Director Reinecke? Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Hilsky.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0.
With that, then we'll move on to action item number 9A, or pardon me, 9B, Phase 2 Lower Aquifer Nitrate Investigation. The recommendation is to approve funding for Cleeth Harris, geologist, to perform additional nitrate source investigation or provide an alternate direction to staff. So with that, then I'll turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Chair Hilsky. Item 9B, Phase 2 Lower Aquifer Nitrate Investigation. So the S&T Mutual Water Company is measuring elevated nitrate concentrations in their LA8 water supply well. In 2021, they hired Cleeth Harris geologists to complete a nitrate source investigation to assist in better understanding the source of those nitrates. The conclusions of that investigation were that septic discharges from Cabrillo Estates appear to be the primary source of increasing nitrate concentrations in the lower aquifer groundwater produced by LA8, although there are other potential sources. Additional information on that investigation is provided in the attached technical memorandum in the agenda packet. S&T Mutual presented their findings to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, which requested that S&T perform additional investigations to further determine the source of nitrates. BMC staff is bringing a request today for the BMC to authorize utilization of anticipated unused calendar year 2022 BMC budget to fund the additional investigations. Based on latest available estimates, it's anticipated that the BMC will have approximately $40,000 in unused budget, and the anticipated cost for the additional nitrate investigation is $8,500. BMC staff is recommending approval of these funds because this work will not only just inform the potential source of nitrates for LA8, S&T Mutual Water Company's only well, but it would also be helpful and be able to investigate the source of nitrates for other purveyor wells, Golden State, LOCSD, lower aquifer wells that are additionally seeing elevated nitrate concentrations and or increasing nitrate concentrations. And just one other caveat, a collection of these samples will still require approvals from the owners of the wells that are listed in the proposal. And if funding is approved, BMC staff will work to attain those approvals before collecting those samples.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, we'll go to public comment, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This item was before the BMC several months ago. I objected then, and I thought this was a settled matter. Now S&T is back to the BMC with their hand out. And what I really don't understand is why staff, why your executive director has enabled this. This was over with. There is absolutely no benefit to Golden State or the CSD. It's ridiculous. It's a regionalized nitrate study. And what is the S&T end game? What are they going to do with the information? They seem to be going after Cabrillo. So are we going to help fund them to somehow go after Cabrillo Estates? I think that's a bad option. The water system limitations of S&T are not the Basin Management Committee's problem. They're not the community's problem. Their limitations are what they are, and they need to face the realities of that. The fact that we have unused unused funds in the budget, that's not a reason to fund this. And it appears from looking at the Cleith Harris proposal that $8,500 is the total, appears to be, we're funding the whole thing, or the BMC is funding the whole thing. This is a no, no, no. Again, I didn't support it when it was here before, and it's just unnecessary paperwork. If S&T wants this information, let them pay for it, let them get it. And then lastly, in closing, the idea that the water board wants this, well, they told S&T if they wanted to continue the conversation, they needed to get this, not the BMC, not anybody else. Reject this request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
There's no further public comment online.
Becky McFarland, yay on S&T and finding out more about the nitrates. And yes, the BMC should do this. This is one aquifer. They're not on a separate aquifer. We've got approximately a third of the residents in this town that were kept, they're outside the prohibition zone. Some of them were the wealthiest neighborhoods in town. That caused such a division in this town. And just that one thing would have helped. It also would mean more water would be going into the sewer system, the water recycling plant, and the water would be being cleaned up and then put back into the mound. When I first moved here in '85, there was actually an article in the newspaper saying that Cabrillo Estates is on a different watershed. And I just wanted to say, I laughed out loud. I was 27 years old and, I'd taken quite a few science classes, but I just looked up and went, seriously? And they said, oh, but it flows out to the ocean. I go, oh, well, yay, that's better. Then I had someone tell me, oh, it only goes over into Hazard Creek. No, they shouldn't be polluting any water either. They should be connected. And the BMC is for all of us, is for this one aquifer. Let's clean it up to the best we can. The more that's clean, the more there is to use. So please, I say fund this and any other study that's going to help our aquifer get better. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I'll close public comment. I did have one question, Dan, based on the conversation we had. Is this 8,500 the total cost, or is S&T putting some money into? Because I think they need to. At least that's my opinion. I don't think we should fund the whole thing.
My understanding, Terrell Hilsky, is that 8,500 is the total cost. I would acknowledge, though, that S&T solely funded the first phase of this study, so they have contributed their own costs towards this effort.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification.
I have another question on clarification. So your summary here, it just talks about LA8, but then Cleith's memo and estimate includes both LA8 and LA9. So does that 8,500 include, it's estimated from Cleith, include LA8 and LA9, because that's what's listed in his memo?
Yes. So, and I should have mentioned that in my previous response. S&T Mutual has actually already funded the collection of these additional samples from their LA8 well. And so we don't need to do that again. This proposal would include collection of the same suite of water quality samples from LA9, and then as well as an upper aquifer well to provide additional information, and then police efforts to update the report based on these additional water quality results. Yeah,
So just to clarify, you're not resampling LA8 again.
correct.
Okay. So what, by approving this, I would be giving approval to sample Golden State's well at this time?
No, you would be just solely approving the BMC to fund. We would still need additional approval from Golden State for the sampling to occur.
Okay, so I thought, and so that is a portion of the 8,500 though, is that sampling?
The funding, yeah.
So we don't know what this cost really is gonna, if there's not approval to sample that well, because my thought is, I think it is important to understand this, and I want to help and participate and know this, but what I'm interpreting, the objective that S&T is after can be achieved from their well. And if it's not, then maybe additional sampling is needed, is kind of my thought. So why go through and take analysis from another well when we can achieve this goal just from the water that's already been taken and running additional analysis and such. So I guess I'm just really unclear on what I would be approving and the amount I would be approving on this item.
Okay, yeah, let me try to take a more detailed explanation of it. And maybe others can jump in if they have additional information. So approximately $6,000 of the 8,500 is to analyze the results from LA8 and any other results that may or may not be obtained, and update the report and the findings of the lower aquifer nitrate investigation. 2,500 of that cost is to do the additional sampling of potentially LA9 and or the upper aquifer well. And so it's $6,000 is required to move this forward. And if we want to move it forward with additional data, then it would cost approximately 2,500 to do that additional sampling to support the analysis.
I can make a motion if there's no other questions.
Thank you for your input. So one thing I do have to address is Jeff's comment that S&T is after Cabrillo. That's not accurate at all. I want to actually point out that I don't know if you know anyone in Cabrillo, I'm sure you do, but they're up against installing very expensive nitrate remediation units on their septic systems. That is not cheap. That has maintenance all year, every year, indefinitely. That's expensive. So if you know anyone in Cabrillo Estates, encourage them to do a cost benefit on their own, a sewer or a septic with nitrate, and they may come to the same conclusion that S&T has. So I just need to address that because it's out of context, I think. And then the other thing, yeah, this isn't about, at this point, it's not about S&T. We know our nitrates are increasing. We know there's a really good chance it's from septic systems. We can't do much about that, but when we're looking at the health of the basin, we can do something about that. We can identify it, and then we can pursue the right type of mitigation. That can't happen without data and analysis and studies. So I just want to make that point.
Thank you.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, I'll add on to that very much my thoughts that this is a matter of characterizing the basin, and to do so, we need appropriate spatial sampling. This is a geotechnical issue that needs to be resolved. And, you know, I certainly respect all of the purveyors' authority over their wells. And I think this is properly conditioned to receive that authority before any sampling occurs. Any entity that has jurisdiction over a well, authority over a well, will be consulted and the appropriate permissions granted before that happens. I would encourage all purveyors to participate fully, because again, understanding this problem is going to take a proper technical approach, and that includes proper spatial sampling. I think the other thing I'd point out is that we are a considerable distance from establishing definitively the source of the nitrate contamination in the S&T mutual wells. An initial study has been made, and based, as my reading of it is based on the likely amount of nitrate being deposited in various areas of the basin. The Cabrillo states is identified as an area that bears greater examination, and that's what this does. I'd also note that before a specific remediation of those nitrates is undertaken, either mandated by that if remediation of those nitrates is mandated by the regional board, and it would be the regional board that would do that, they need to have a proper technical basis for doing that. So we're a further ways from deciding exactly how this particular situation is going to be remediated, or in fact, if over time it actually needs to be. Because the last thing I'll note is that there is some time left before the nitrates in the S&T well get to a point where they need something needs to be done about it. And I grant you that the trend is not in the direction that we'd like to see, but this is not, we have time to do the studies that we need to do. So for those reasons and all the analysis is in the staff report, I'm fully supportive of staff's recommendation on this.
Thank you, Bruce.
So if I just want to keep the clarification.
Go ahead.
Just when I say I don't have approval for these wells, we haven't had time, I just found out about this a few days ago. And so I haven't had the proper internal discussions to talk about it. And just to be clear, this isn't a simple little nitrate test. We're testing for things that are not regulated at this point and not required to do. So you're opening up, not that we don't want to know about it, but we're just opening up a door. We got to be careful when you go through a door. You got to be careful on the other side of that door. So not that I think that there's anything bad out there. We're just going beyond what we do as a normal company, and we need to exercise, at least Golden State exercise caution on that. So not trying to avoid anything, not trying to get out of doing anything, generally support this. Had a question about the cost because I saw that well was included in there. What I would recommend doing is for this motion is to approve the motion, get the $6,000 for S&T to go forward. And then Golden State staff will work with Dan offline regarding the outcome of that, because I think we can achieve that goal by having S&T look at if additional analysis is warranted, then we'll come back for that other 2,500. So I have a motion on the board to modify the request to $6,000 and approve it at that point.
Well, let's see if there's a second. I don't think there's
There's a second. I'll second.
Okay, I just want to make sure that this is, yes, S&T is kind of the genesis of the project, but we're pretty much through. And not only that, we've cooperated with the board to the point where we're doing work for them. So we have for sure invested in this project. I just want to make it clear, this is not you're putting money into S&T's pocket or benefiting us at this point. It is a basin initiative.
No, yeah, and that's not a concern of mine. I'm just more looking at from Golden State side of what we can and can't do is kind of more of my approach. So I know S&T spent a lot of time, effort, and energy on this, so I don't question that part of it.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, I certainly respect Golden State's authority on, again, over their old infrastructure, their own infrastructure. But the proposal before us is a contract not to exceed. And so I think in terms of good governance, I think it appropriate for us to approve the full project here, so we don't have to go back through another action before this committee. And if Golden State can work with the subcontractor here and other parties to get the results that they need without expending the 2,500 to do more sampling in S&T's wells, fine, we won't spend that money. So this is just, I don't see any problem approving this. It doesn't commit S&T to the sampling. So I'm going to oppose the motion as it is framed right now.
Well, like I say, I got this 2 days before this meeting, so I didn't have time. I'm not as invested in S&T and that familiar with the project and stuff. And so that not to exceed authorizes that to move forward. I would like to see it come back before the board, the results if this is a project that is now in the BMC realm and I'm expecting we're going to see those results come back, and at that time we can authorize the additional money.
Let's take a vote.
Any further comments? Okay. We have a motion and a second. You want to call the vote, Daniel, or take a vote?
I guess just one comment along costs. We'll spend a lot more than $2,500 if we have to bring this back for approval, just in terms of staff time and people's time. Now, if we have another meeting, then obviously that's not all borne by that. Another comment is also, it's not just LA9 that's included in the analytical cost, it's the upper aquifer well also. So would there be support for including a portion of the analytical cost to sample the upper aquifer well, but not?
How about this, if I could, Mr. Chairman, if perhaps we could modify the motion to indicate that we're going to approve this project with the stipulation that none of these monies are going to be spent on sampling Golden State's wells until Golden State provides, it has a chance to analyze the data and provides explicit permission. And if we have to make that a contract amendment, we would authorize you to work with Cleve Harris to make that. Would that satisfy Golden State's issues?
So if I'm hearing correctly, you're going to increase the amount to 8,500?
I will go with the full amount, but we will stipulate that none of that 8,500 is going to be spent on sampling from Golden State's wells until such time as Golden State has had a chance to review the existing data and its analysis and to provide explicit permission to sample its wells and analyze them.
So what if the can we amend Cleve's estimate to say not to exceed, and he provides a registry of his expenses?
Yeah, that's his standard
That's
billing.
That's what it works. Yeah. That's his standard approach.
So does the motion maker want to
Recall the motion?
Or modify it.
modify it or withdraw it, whichever, and start from scratch?
Okay. So
So I'm getting input that before we change a motion, we need to vote on the original motion.
Motion maker can pull it.
He can pull it. It's his.
okay, so I'm gonna pull the motion. I'm gonna make a motion to approve this item with a modification that it is it's clearly stated that it's not to exceed $8,500. Cleith provides a registry of his cost. And that before Dan will need to work with Golden State staff before analysis is taken.
And I will second that motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll go ahead and take a roll call, please, Daniel.
Director Reinecke,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Hilsey.
Yes,
Okay, motion passes.
thank you all. Okay, we'll move on to 9C, which is the funding and organizational study follow-up. The recommendation is to receive requested follow-up information on cost, timing, and decision points for establishing a more formal governance and funding structure for the BMC. We've discussed this quite a bit, so.
Thank you, Chair Ohilsky, and thank you, Ron Munz, for keeping me on track. Yes, we talked about this quite a bit. If the BMC will remember, we had a presentation in July from SCI Consultants that presented their draft technical memorandum outlining an analysis they completed.
Daniel, could I interrupt for a minute? I think since I'm going to have a hard stop at 3, I'm going to change the agenda and move 9D up, because I think that we need to get a little more input into that one. So if that's okay with everybody, I'm going to switch the order and move 9D up. Okay, so let's go to 9D then, which is the draft calendar year 2033 or 2033. Boy, I just ran up ahead of time. Yeah. Draft calendar year 2023 budget and water recycling funding program facilities planning study grant. The recommendation is to receive information on potential items for BMC calendar year 2023 budget and provide direction on staff as how to proceed with the calendar year 2023 budget and water recycling funding program facilities planning study grant. So with that, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair Ohilsky. The BMC rules and regulations require that the BMC adopt an annual budget at the first BMC meeting following December 1st of the current year, is the very specific direction provided, but generally adopt a budget for the upcoming calendar year. To assist the BMC in analyzing and agreeing upon a budget for calendar year 2023, the BMC staff has brought forth this preliminary draft, and I won't even want to characterize it as a draft calendar year budget, but a presentation of a number of items for the BMC to consider for potential inclusion in the calendar year 2020 budget. There is a selection of a couple of those items provided in the agenda packet as a starting point, so the BMC can kind of understand the magnitude of the cost, and if certain items were to be included, obviously open to input into what items the BMC wants to include in the upcoming year's budget. There are a couple of items that we've talked about. I'll just review them briefly. Up for consideration, one is the construction of a new skyline monitoring well. This would be done in conjunction with grant funding from the National Estuary Program. With a budget of $85,000 in calendar year 2023, we believe we could construct a new skyline monitoring well to replace the Rosina well, critical well in the chloride metric, and one that is impacted both from production, as it is a production well, and also from borehole leakage, making it a challenging well. And this was identified as a high priority, or if not the highest priority, in the recent tech memo from Cleateris geologists for improving the lower aquifer monitoring network. Next item is the Los Osos stream gauge rating curve. The BMC budgeted funding for the 2022. We're optimistic that we'll get some additional storms this year and we can get out and collect additional data while the creek is flowing. However, if that's not the case, if we want to collect data next year, we would need to budget funds to do that. Another item is the funding and organizational study polling. This would have been easier if we had done the item before, but this would be polling to evaluate the community's interest in potentially establishing a more formal funding mechanism for BMC activities, basin plan implementation through a public vote. And then the last two items, specific items listed, are the additional lower aquifer well modifications that we've discussed at previous meetings, but did not move forward with this year because we didn't have sufficient time to obtain the necessary permits and approvals. The other component of this item is what relates to the water recycling funding facilities planning study grant. We've talked about this rather extensively. The reason we're bringing it back is the state board has finally reached back out to the CSD about their application and indicated that there is the potential to request additional grant funding as they are increasing the total grant amount available through that program across the board. And the timeline they've indicated is the same, whether we pursue our original application or we submit an amended application with an increased grant amount. Staff is recommending that the BMC approve submitting an amended application that requests an increased grant amount and is proposing an approach that would allow the BMC to increase its request for additional grant funding without spending any additional not already anticipated to be spent funds. Basically showing the peer review contribution that the BMC had previously agreed to contribute to this effort in future budgets, and then also the Los Osos Basin Well database as both as match funding to request an additional $50,000 in grant funds. So in essence, a no cost request for an additional $50,000, which could go towards the development of the transient model and the analysis of different recycled water and other supplemental supply opportunities for the basin to increase the sustainable yield. And so I have a comparison of the different grant request fundings amounts in this presentation. And then the last item again is just a draft, budget for the BMC's consideration to better understand, if they chose to include certain items, what that would look like in terms of an overall budget. The other thing to point out here, included in the BMC administration, facilitation, and legal counsel line item is sufficient budget for BMC contract legal counsel to participate with legal counsel from the BMC parties to develop a joint powers authority agreement. That I've received input from RWG Law that, with support from the other legal counsel and leveraging the current draft joint powers authority agreement that was previously developed, that they could support those activities within the anticipated budget for legal services and for an amount of approximately $5,000 or less. Most of the items 1 through 5 are pretty much, these are our baseline services. These are the things that we need to do to meet our requirements to the court. And then, item 6 is the peer review contribution that had been previously approved. And then included in this, draft budget is the new monitoring well and the Los Osos Creek stream gauge rating curve. However, again, just a template one way that the BMC could choose to go. And so really looking for 2 things here: direction from the BMC as to what to potentially include in a more formal budget for calendar year 2023 to bring back to the BMC for formal approval, and 2, approval to move forward with the amended water recycling funding program grant application with the increased grant request.
Well, thank you. We have any questions? I have a question. I don't know. Is GAG a word or is that a typo?
I'm guessing that's a typo. CHG is a commonly used acronym for Cleoteris geologist that I use.
So I think GAGE, it was probably gauge.
Yes. And
It says Los Osos Creek Stream Gauge Rating Curve. I'm just trying to understand whether there was a technical GAGI thing that I didn't know.
Yeah, I think it's probably missing an E. It's
so
it's
it's
GAGE in other portions of the staff report.
So it is a gauge.
It is a gauge. So yeah, just for background, we have obviously the Los Osos Creek. There is a stream gauge which measures the level of the water in that creek. What we don't have is a rating curve, which is a relationship between the level and the amount of water that's actually flowing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a couple of them. So the are we asking for an additional 100,000 or 50,000. And the reason I ask is because I was looking at the table and the numbers didn't really line up. So we had, if I just look at the total on your attachment of the scope, the study there, 330, and then we go to 400. I see there's an additional 20,000, so that equals a $50,000 increase. And so our match, I mean, what are we asking for here? 100 total? Is that what we're?
We would be showing an additional 50,000 in match for other things that we already approved and planned on spending funds on, and then requesting an additional 50,000 in grant. So it makes the project total look like 100,000, but it's really just an increase in scope of 50,000 fully funded through grant funds.
Okay. And then, so the 20,000 for this well database, that's what we just approved on the last one. Why is that not just a separate line item? I mean, I guess if we're doing that work right now under this current budget, it really wasn't explained that we're going to add money to it later, that we're going to increase the cost from 24,000. So last month we approved 24,000 for a well database. Now we're adding an additional 20,000 into that. That wasn't clearly explained when it was laid out that we're going to ask for additional funds next time. And then why is it included in the modeling?
The intent is not to increase the funding for the database. The intent would be use 20,000 of the 24,000 that was already approved to spend as the match funding. The reason I show it here is 20,000 instead of 24,000 is we only needed an additional 20,000 in match funds. Again, the goal here is just leverage previously approved funding from the BMC to request additional grant funds.
So should that initial fee estimate include that 24,000? I know. I mean, I just, it seemed odd that it was blank and then now we're adding 20.
Yeah, so the explanation for that is under the initial fee estimate, we were already achieving the maximum grant funding that was available under the previous program guidelines of 150,000. So we could have shown more match, but it wouldn't have got us any additional grant funding. Now that they've increased the maximum grant funding that's available, we're showing additional match funding to be able to request additional grant funds.
And so what is the timing for this increase to request additional funds for the modeling? When do we have to have that in?
If I can chime in there, sooner the better. Because we've been delayed so far on receiving the approval. Our grant person that we're working with at the state board, on my word, said, yeah, I think we're going to increase by 50,000. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, because they're waiting for us to signal yes, go, so they can finish processing the application. Okay. And then just kind of finishing up here, to take so much time with all these questions, but so you lump these into different buckets, like the fee estimate. Is that following the guidelines of the grant application kind of, or why? I see like the hydrogeologist review and development, we didn't increase any funding for that, but the other areas, the updated fees, it went into different, and I would think if we had additional funds, like what that would be used for is additional runs and kind of dialing in the model better, right? So just layman's terms kind of, but why that bucket's blank, but then other ones are so much more. I would think we just ask for additional money and then we construct the model the way that we see necessary. I guess I was just wondering why it's broken down into these different buckets and some got allocated more money than others.
Yeah, so one of the requirements of the grant application is to provide a project budget. And so the initial fee estimate was provided to the state board. And I added this updated fee estimate to show potentially one way that, we could utilize the additional grant funding, where we would utilize that additional grant funding. And so we showed an increase in funding available for the transient model, for the scenario analysis, and for the recycled water / supplemental water alternatives evaluation. I I chose to put the additional grant funding into those buckets based on my conversations with, technical staff in terms of how those budgets, sat relative to the work that needed to be done in those tasks. So I modified that based on sort of my intuition on where we might be able to need or benefit from additional budget. But, open to input on, where we might want to put that funding. I don't know that. Well, the state board will have some opinions if we shift it dramatically, but there's
some
flexibility.
discretion.
Yeah.
All right. That is just one general. So right now, we're not approving anything. You're just looking for input on how to come back with this budget in the end. Is that what I understood correctly?
We don't need approval on the proposed calendar year 2023 budget. I do need direction or approval to submit this updated budget to the the State Water Resource Control Board to stay on track as Ron described. I don't know, we don't need to make final decisions on the 2023 budget to do that. In reality, I mean, we're showing 20,000 that's already approved in this year's budget. The other match that we're showing is the peer review, and so that is something we would need to include in the 2023 budget. As we told the state board that's one of the things we were going to do as part of the match funding, but the rest of the budget we can determine at a future meeting date.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry. This is my last thing. So I'm just kind of going with, are we going to increase our 2023 budget by approving this? I mean, I know it's just a small incremental increase at this point, but just trying to add, you gave us an estimate of the 2023 by moving forward, and are we going to see some changes to the study? You got $15,000 here in the proposed budget. I would think it would be more than that. I was surprised it was so low, actually.
So the 15,000 represents 30,000 over 2 years because the project will take 2 years to complete. So we're not increasing the overall budget. We have a number of things that we could eliminate from the 2023 budget and keep that in. And I mean, we could not fund it and go back to the state board and request an amendment too, though that would likely be a lengthy process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think you have that. It's anticipated an additional 30,000 would be contributed by the BMC. So I mean, that language is in here. So I mean, this is basically, in my opinion, an outline of where we're going to end up going, and then we're going to tweak this before we actually adopt it. So
okay.
So public comments now.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone or on the computer, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards, and unfortunately, it would have been better, frankly, to take 9C first before 9D. And I'll point out, first of all, your executive director, again, jumping the gun, has $40,000 included for funding an organizational study polling that's yet to be approved in 9C. This is a non-starter, and I'll certainly speak to it more when we come to 9C. But this whole matter is it's not appropriate. Additionally, in the same vein, your executive director he spoke about the $5,000. He's ready to let our RWG law start on the JPA. Well, that's part of 9C. And he's got that in his 2023 budget, and he just told you he wants to get them going. That's absurd. There is no JPA. Then we talk about the grant. And the grant is not free money at all. It has strings attached, costs money to get it. There's monitoring, administration. The whole idea behind the grant was to fund the transient model. We've lost our way. Let's focus on the transient model. Let's forget about the supplemental supply alternatives evaluation and the rest of that. Let's focus on the transient model. Let's get that going. Let's not delay any further. Those are my comments. Thank you.
There's no further public comment online.
Thank you. Public comment in the boardroom. Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the board. I just want to make one clarification here. We're not approving the budget. This is basically an outline or parameters for the budget. So in response to Jeff's comment about 9C, if we decide not to do that, then that comes out of the budget. Okay, can we have a motion here? Just,
I don't know if we need, I think staff's heading in the right direction here.
Yeah, staff direction to submit the updated table to
okay,
the,
can we
for the
just
grant
have,
would be fine.
yeah, can we just have, well, I'd still like to have agreement.
Okay, motion to approve staff's approach here and to submit the updated table for the grant agreement.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay,
Under discussion, if I might, appreciate staff's creative energies in getting us there without having to peel more bills out of our wallet.
yes, okay, so I think, is everybody in agreement with Bruce's interpretation of what our direction is? So, yeah, everybody's in agreement with that direction,
Without objection.
without objection. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna take a short break right now because I do have to hard stop, like I said, so we'll have to. My alternate is in the audience there, so we'll bring him up and I'll hand it over to Mark. But let's take a 5-minute break just so we can do that. And anybody needs to use a restroom, it's time for that too.
Everyone, make sure your microphones are muted. You're up here. Well, it's a good thing I couldn't get LinkedIn from home then. I'm sorry that I didn't let you know ahead of time. So it's only up here that they see. I was in a hard short, but then I did. Trying to get some air.
What's the river?
No, they were away, but it was great. Yeah, I was thinking a lot of it. And so you keep hearing like, me, low, which is a little bit. It's getting hot. I needed to reach that down from. Right?
Are you with?
Yeah. I was looking at landing on so yeah, it's all, you know, the way. It was actually monsoons were going through on Saturday. Now we're like.
Yeah.
No, I know. One thing people in out there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I got the phone call I needed to have at 12:46. And then I unfortunately didn't pick it up, and then I called them back and said, yeah, and they said, well, no. You gotta come in to St. Louis at the time, and they said, well, we close at 4. This is the city.
Bye, Marshall.
How's it going? I know, we do. Hanging in there. We don't know what you're. Well, I was gonna wear shorts. I was gonna wear shorts, but I figured. Was it well received? What it is now.
I need to find out where we're having. There's also.
It's just.
But the view was here out there.
Yeah. There hasn't been a lot of. They said that the law says they haven't heard this conversation. But the ramp is back to the getting ready. It's getting ready. Now we're talking about it. Okay, we're gonna bring the meeting back. Reconvene. And the last item on the agenda is, of our action items is 9C, funding and organizational study follow-up.
Thank you, Vice Chair Zimmer. Yeah, this is a follow-up item from a presentation that we had back at the July BMC meeting from SCI Consultants. They provided a presentation on an analysis that they had completed with respects to different organizational and funding structures potentially available to the BMC, pros and cons of those different primarily funding mechanisms, as well as they developed a funding model to help the BMC and the community of Los Osos understand kind of the magnitude of what fees would be to help fund basin management, what I call monitoring and management activities, kind of what we do here, but also, what would be the magnitude of the fees to fund basin plan or other infrastructure programs to improve the sustainable yield of the basin. So after that presentation, we had received direction from the BMC to come back with kind of what I'm characterizing as a roadmap, or some sort of information on, all right, lots of great information in this report, but where do we go from here, or what do we need to consider with respect to what to do next if we want to pursue these more formal organizational structures and or funding mechanisms. And so BMC staff has worked again with SCI Consulting to bring forth what is really a kind of a flow chart of key decision points, timelines, and costs associated with making these additional decisions around formalizing the BMC's organizational structure and or potential funding mechanisms. So with that, I will move to the flow chart here. Let's see if I can't make this. I guess that doesn't move on my screen. Ron's got that. So they put together this flow chart that really outlines, what would be the steps to take to move down the path to these more formal mechanisms for the BMC. What would be the costs associated with each of these steps, and then where are the key decision points, so that the BMC has an understanding of once it heads down a path, how far is it committed, both really in terms of cost, but also in effort as well. And so it really starts at the beginning. If the BMC wants to consider a special tax, which was kind of the recommended funding mechanism that came out of the SCI study, one of the first things that it would do is, look to form a joint powers authority. And one of the really, I think, beneficial things that came out of SCI's study is they found an example, a joint powers authority that included, a variety of different organizational types. As everyone knows, the BMC is made up of a diverse set of organizations, with a community services district, a PUC regulated water utility, a mutual water company, and then the county, as a land use authority. But they found an example up in Northern California where similar types of organizations have partnered to form a JPA, and they have a mechanism where every member of that JPA has equitable voting authority, and they can preserve the authorities that they want to have within the JPA, to achieve their desired objectives. And so there's information on that in the report. In talking with the BMC legal counsel, as well as BMC party legal counsel, we think that we could move forward with establishing a joint powers authority document for approximately $5,000, assuming there's contributions from legal counsel from each of the individual BMC parties. And one of the reasons we can do that is there is a draft Joint Powers Authority document that was developed really even before my time with BMC, but that incorporates a lot of the necessary elements and would just need to be refined and updated based on more recent discussions. And so that's an option for establishing a more formal governance structure for the BMC is establishing a JPA. There are some potential additional, administrative costs that would come with that, though I think we could keep that relatively streamlined. But there would also provide some pretty significant benefits if the BMC were to form a JPA. It would provide the ability to contract directly with consultants and contractors, which the BMC as an entity can't do now. Would provide the BMC the ability to, establish a bank account and roll funds year over year, unspent funds. I think as we just demonstrated on the previous item, it's a bit of a tap dance at the end of the year if we want to try to fund initiatives before the year ends. I mean, I think a great example of that is, we weren't able to modify, the highest priority well that we could have modified because we didn't have the ability to roll unused funds from this year into next year. So we had to make a decision to modify a different well, which will still add value to our monitoring program, but, wouldn't have been our first choice, all things being equal. And so that's just one example. The other example is, we talked about funding a new monitoring well. Those sort of larger dollar initiatives are really hard to do in our current structure because we can't save up funds from one year to the next year to then be able to have a larger reserve to take on, more initiatives. So we end up having to do a lot of small initiatives and maybe not be able to do, those higher value initiatives that we would like to take on. So just a couple examples of the benefit of the JPA. The other benefit of the JPA is that could be an entity that receives the funding through a special tax or other funding organization. So I just want to highlight that there are, benefits from a JPA, even if the BMC doesn't move forward with this larger, more formal funding mechanism. So, however, if the BMC does want to look at establishing a special tax, then we start moving down the flow chart here. And one of the first recommended steps is to complete a community survey. As we discussed when the report was presented, the funding options that are available to the BMC have a relatively high bar to clear in terms of public vote approvals. In that they require 2/3 approval of voting registered voters. And so it's unlikely the BMC would want to go out to a vote without some sort of doing its due diligence and analyzing whether it has the support of the community for this or not. And so that would be the point of the community survey is design and develop a survey, the printing and mailing and tabulation, and then analysis of the survey results and presentations on the findings. And, I think the survey could be utilized, A, to, gather information on, the community's interest in moving forward with something like this, but B, also, what elements were received favorably by the community, what elements maybe community didn't like, and, how could the BMC tailor, whatever it's putting forth towards what would hopefully get the support of the community. And so that would be kind of the next key decision point. So I should highlight, first key decision point, form a JPA or not, provide direction to staff to move forward with the JPA document formation. Second decision point would be, whether or not to move forward with this community survey. And then, the next third big decision point would be after the board received the results of the survey, it could then decide to not move forward and, move towards the red triangle or diamond, or to move forward with the special tax implementation. And so that's where the costs really start to increase. You're looking at anywhere from $60,000 to $140,000 to pursue a special tax. And that gets broken down into a couple of buckets here. First is community outreach. Even after the survey, you still need to get the word out and put the messaging on why a special tax is beneficial to the community. And so there's budget to do that. Then there's, just the mechanism costs. There's a certain cost to put together the county election. And that is largely dependent on the number of registered voters. And then there's some, I guess I would call some structural or administrative costs is designing the special tax itself. As we saw in the previous presentation, there are a number of options and for, how that tax could be structured and, would it be applied on a parcel or a water user or other basis? And then also, how would the fees be split amongst those different users? There are a number of decisions to be made there, methodologies to be developed, and then documentation. So in conclusion, the total cost to go through this whole cycle is, estimated to be around $95,000 to $185,000. That, however, if the BMC wanted to move forward with just the initial components, those costs are, much smaller. Currently estimated at $5,000 for, putting together a joint powers agreement document for the parties to then consider. And then 30 to 40,000 if it then wanted to move forward with the initial community survey. Just to kind of carry this through the previous item, in the draft calendar year 2022 budget, there that 5,000 would fit within the 20,000 budgeted for the previous year for legal services. So it something could be rolled into kind of existing stat or BMC facilitation costs. The $40,000, there was a public comment about that was already included. That wasn't, even though it's just a draft budget that was put out there, that $40,000 wasn't in that draft budget. That would be something that we would have to likely make decisions around prioritizing the surveying over, other initiatives. So yeah, again, I don't think we're not looking for formal direction here, but we just wanted to be responsive. Well, I guess direction's fine. We don't have any specific required action, but wanted to be responsive to the BMC's request that the last time we brought this item for their consideration and follow up with, hopefully a more clear kind of next steps. A lot of great information in the previous report, somewhat overwhelming amount of information, and hopefully this helps kind of narrow down, what are the steps the BMC could consider taking to establish a more formal organizational and or funding structure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Bringing it back to the board, do we have any questions for Dan?
Question after public comment.
No questions. We'll open it to public comment.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. Please put this genie back in the bottle. No next steps is my suggestion. You heard this in July, and we really concluded, I thought, that none of this, the JPA, the special tax, none of it was a good fit for Los Osos or our basin management. But your executive director continues to bring back this whole funding and governance issue. It's a make work deal for staff. And I would suggest to you that our modest basin administration funding has been handled so far. We don't need to go out and fund that. The basin plan programs are being funded mostly through ratepayers of the respective water districts. We don't need another layer of government, another bureaucracy for taxation and fiefdom building. Believe me, there are ways to overcome the inability to roll over budgetary allocations. There's a way to do that from an accounting standpoint. We don't need another layer of government to have a bank account. So please, kill this now. No more next steps. Do not allow staff to spend one more minute on this. The cost is clearly prohibitive. And I don't know if you remember, but Heimel met the SCI guy at a seminar in the men's room, I think is the way I remember it. This was a sole sourced contract to SCI in the beginning. And now I told you they'd be back for more money. And now they're back for more money. Reject this in its entirety. Please kill this matter today. Thank you.
There's no further public comment online.
We have one comment in the audience.
Becky McFarland again. I don't understand all of this, but in speaking with to find out and survey people if they want to pay a tax, it made me kind of laugh because I mean, people are struggling to stay here. I know people don't want to see another tax. I would like to see things easier and be able to make things roll over. I've had to deal with budgets at the County Office of Ed, and it does make it easier if you can do that. So if there's a way to not tax people, and I also wondered how you're going to survey all these people. Are you going to have volunteers go out and ask them, or hope that they actually open the mail and look at that, go to farmer's market or something? But I agree. I can't see anybody voting for a tax. The last big thing I remember this town supported was it Measure B for our schools? And now they're going to be asking for another one of those. And it was a shock that people actually supported that. So that's just my opinion. No more taxes, please.
Okay, no further public comment. Bring it back to the board.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate getting this information. We've been thinking about this for a long time. You know, my thought would be that perhaps our executive director could work with BMC party staff to consider when you might bring an agenda item that would actually seek direction on a timetable. And whether that's, it doesn't seem likely before the end of the year, but early next year might be the appropriate time. And I think the concepts here probably need to be separated in this sense, is that I think analyzing what the JPA would look like and what it would do without a special tax is one set of one set of information that this committee could usefully have, and then analyzing how it's pretty clear how the JPA would work with a special tax. Those are two, it's organization and funding. So it seems to me the cleanest to talk about the organization. The input to that is minimal. I think that surveying the community, which also involves educating the community as to the function of the BMC and what lies ahead for the community is important. And I would caution one bit of narrative, which is not to tell the community what the benefit of the special tax is, but what the consequence of the special tax is, because public entities are expressly prohibited from advocating for things that show on the ballot. And so our role here would be to provide information that here's what basin management would look like without the special tax, and here's what it would look like with the special tax. And I think one of the benefits of the JPA would be to consolidate all those discussions. For instance, the LOCSD, to my understanding, has gone through Prop 218 processes to secure revenue to fund at least part, if not all, of their basin management initiatives. That happens separate from all the other ones. And I understand that each of these four very different entities has four very different approach, very different processes. But I think that, being methodical and laying out the situation that we face, the goals that we need to achieve and the means by which it is funded and governed is a useful enterprise. And when staff's ready to bring those before us again, organization seems to be the first thing that we should talk about.
I've always been concerned that we haven't had this discussion at the CSD level. It's always been here at the BMC. And so I've kind of been pushing for that discussion at our own local level. And that might be the best way to introduce this concept to the community too, because we do have monthly utility advisory committee meetings, and that could be a way to introduce the topic to the community. That gives us a couple months to roll that out, which fits in with your time frame about early next year. I would like to pursue this a little bit further, at least from our CSD perspective, and then see where it goes and take it from there. But back to what the concept of a special tax, what you have to remember is that people in the purveyors jurisdictions are paying already. So a special tax might help ease that burden by spreading it to other members of the community that aren't involved with the BMC issues right now, because they're on private wells. They're not served by the purveyors. So that again is messaging. Yes, yeah, and yes. And those are my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. Anything? No? Good comments and in agreement and in alignment with those comments. Just the education part, I think if we do go down that, just reflecting back on the development of the ISJ and percentages of obligation by the purveyors, how that was broken into, we would, I would advocate we look into that also. Is that an equitable split? I think, the basis of when this ISJ was created, it was more of, we're going to work under these conditions. This was a significant component or a milestone in our objective, was to get a unified process where everybody is contributing and helping to manage the basin. So I think we'd have to look at that part of it too. So right now, Dan, I think Bruce made some recommendations for you. I think those are good recommendations. And just as far as that public outreach and education, I think that was something I had on my list too, was just community and education to understand, what does this really look like? The fact that it's just a taxation, that really is not the intent of it. It's to equitably, across the entire basin. So, yeah, I don't think we need a motion or anything of that nature. We just accept and file, right? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll close item 9C. And the next is adjournment. So meeting's adjourned. All right. Thank you.